So we all have those series that we start to read and are really enjoying, but then something else comes along and distracts us, or maybe because of real life obligations, we don't have time to keep going at the moment. And then when we do have time, we start thinking, well, what should I read? And we look at our wish list or our TBR, and instead of continuing the series we were enjoying, we pick up the new and exciting thing that got recommended to us in the time in between putting a pause on that series and now. And I think at least part of this is because after we read a couple books in a series, we may not know how it will end, but we get the gist of what the books are trying to do, or at least we think so. But with a new book or series, there's always the sense that we have no idea what's going to happen in this book. Unless you're like Gabe or the Fiction Fans podcast who just look up spoilers for books. I will never understand that. And also the feeling that within this new mystery book, anything is possible. There is a chance that this could become one of your new favorite books of all time. And as readers, we kind of get addicted to this bookish slot machine where maybe you'll get a super crappy book and you can have fun making fun of it, or you'll be pleasantly surprised by something and love it. But in doing this too often, we forget to commit to the series that we have already started. And before you know it, you have several series that you promise yourself you're going to get back to someday, like me. So today I'll be talking about some series I genuinely plan on continuing, but I just don't know when. There's plenty of series I just straight up DNF'd and don't have any plans on returning to, like any of Anthony Ryan's books, the Land series, Book of the Ancestor. I'm sure there's many others, and I was gonna make a video about books that I've DNF'd and why I DNF'd them, but then I realized that for almost every single one of them, it was just because I wasn't enjoying them and got bored, which wouldn't really make a great video, honestly. But in this video, we'll talk about the series that I do plan on getting back to, what I liked about them, and why I set them aside. At some point, I'll pick up a few of these and put them in a poll over on our Patreon page, and if you back us at even the lowest tier, you can vote on what series I finish next, and I'll make a video on it for your enjoyment. But speaking of Patreon, that is actually linked below in the description, and it helps us pay for our monthly podcasting expenses. If you back us at the Night Angel tier, you get your name shouted out at the end of our videos, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And we're super appreciative of everyone who joins us over on Patreon. But if you can't support us that way, that's no problem, but you can also help out the channel a lot just by subscribing and liking the video, which helps us get seen by the algorithm every time we have some growth on the channel. Alright, let's go down the list of series that I've been meaning to get back to. These aren't in any particular order, and I'm sure there's even more that I'm not thinking of, but honestly, if I listed every single series that I've set down and plan to come back to, then we'd be here all day. So starting off, we have the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I've only read The Gunslinger, the first book in this series, and I really had mixed feelings about it. I want to say I liked it, and I don't know if that's particularly true. I did kind of like it, but mostly just because I knew that the series would grow into this bigger thing. And so I would say that I want to like it, and I want to enjoy the Dark Tower series. I'm sure it gets better as the series goes on. The first book didn't quite hook me, but again, so many people love this series, and the people that are into it are like really into it. I love the idea of this whole interconnected multiverse of Stephen King's, and I want to be able to make the connections in Stephen King's multiverse, and this series seems like it's kind of the nexus of all of that, where all of those different books and ideas and characters kind of meet and interconnect, I guess. So yeah, I would love to commit to the Dark Tower series. I think that it's probably something that I would get further down the road and realize that I actually enjoyed quite a bit of it, but it is a bit of a commitment. And then we have the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. I left off at the third book. I had finished the third book all the way, which is called The Broken Eye, is the name of that book. And I really love them. I really, really like these books. I feel like they got substantially better with every single book, with the third one being the best that I've read so far. I remember being so stoked on that book by the time I got done with it, and in our podcast group chat, I was like, you guys have got to read this series. It's so good. So why did I set it down for now? And this is one of those things where honestly, I just got busy with podcast stuff. That's how a few of these kind of got set down. And that's the thing with running the podcast. There are so many books that we have to read for this. There's at least one book per week, if not more. And sometimes I just get busy with other stuff and have to set down some of my pleasure reading, I guess, to focus on required reading. The thing that's a little bit daunting about getting back into this series is that I would definitely need a reread, maybe of the previous two books, like book 2 and 3, just because so much happens in that time. I might be able to look up a recap or something and get the gist of it and be able to move on, but it would have to be a pretty detailed recap, because I remember there was some pretty intricate things happening by the end of the third book. And I think that may be another reason why people, when they set down a series, maybe they don't come back to it, because there's all this stuff that they've forgotten about. There's all these intricate, political maneuverings or intricate magic systems and stuff like that. And so it can be a little, I'm going to be using this word a lot, a little daunting to come back to a series that had all that stuff going on after you've been gone for, 6 months or more. It can be hard to remember all that stuff and jump right back into the series. One last thing that has deterred me a little bit from returning to the series is that there's been a lot of negative critical reception for books 4 and 5. A lot of people don't like how it ended or some of the twists that were done by Brent Weeks. And so, man, it's tough when you really like the first 3 books in a series and then you find out it has a really crappy ending. It kind of goes lower on your list of priorities a little bit. But I do want to get back to this series because there's a lot of times where a series will get some sort of negative feedback and I will actually end up liking that stuff more than, the other people. So, who knows? I do want to get back into this series pretty soon, actually, sometime in the next year, maybe pick up the, at least like the third book again and reread that and jump back in. So hopefully that happens soon, because I would definitely love to know how this ends and kind of what all the buzz is about. Then we have the Elder Empire series by Will White. And I think I got to book 3 or 4. It's a little bit confusing. I can't quite remember, because the concept of these books, and I really love the concept, is that there is 2 different stories happening at the same time, running parallel with each other, not in like different timelines. They're happening in the same world at the same time, but you're following 2 different characters, and those 2 plot lines are not happening inside one book at a time. You're following the male character in one book and the female character in another book. So you're bouncing back and forth like 2, 2, 2, 2 all the way through the series, if that makes sense. I hope it does. In some cases, you're almost kind of reading the same story twice, but from different perspectives. And I think that this was such a bold and creative thing to try. And I think that he does it really, really well. But the reason I set it down is because I got into the 3rd or 4th book, I can't remember, and there had been a gap between one of the last books that I had read, and I couldn't remember how it connected, because you really have to pay attention when you're following the guy's story, because they'll cross over at multiple times in the story, and then when you get to the other person's story, you'll be like, oh, that's who that shadowy person in the alleyway was, or something like that. And so you'll see things from the other perspective that you didn't get in the other book. And so you really have to be committed and pay attention to everything that's going on and kind of remember all of the, individual scenes and stuff where they may have crossed paths. And so it's definitely one that you want to binge. You definitely don't want to read other books in between each of these installments. You just want to go straight through the whole thing. And I would love to do that again. I would love to try that again because I remember really, really enjoying these stories. I thought they were really well written. I thought the male main character reminded me a lot of like Locke Lamora. The female character is an assassin who's I can't remember exactly what her whole plot line is because it's been so long now. But I really enjoyed both the characters. I really enjoyed both the stories. I thought it was very gripping and intriguing, but it was just this kind of thing where I had let too much time go in between books. So, anyways, sorry. I would love to go back into this series, and I hope that you guys check it out as well, because you'd probably like it. It's a really creative way to write a series. Just remember that you've got to binge it all the way through. The Shadow Dance books by David Dalglish are the next ones, and I just read the first one in this series. I had every intention of continuing, and I honestly don't know why I didn't. I don't know why I didn't just pick up the second book right away, because I even read some of the second book. There was like a piece of it that was attached to the audiobook of the first one, and I really liked what I read. I really liked the main character. He made it into my video where I talked about my top 10 favorite rogues. I don't think he made it into the top 10, but he was like an honorable mention, I think. By the way, go check that out. It'll be up in the annotations if you like to see that. But yeah, I would say that I'm very likely to go back to this series. Everyone who watches us knows that I love assassins, I love rogues and thieves and stuff like that. And so this series was kind of tailor-made for me, and I really enjoyed what I read so far. And then we have the Nevernight Chronicles by Jay Kristoff. And this is another one where I just read the first one, and I had mixed feelings on it. Not in the same way that I had mixed feelings about The Gunslinger, but the further away I get from this book, the more I think I would like it on a reread. I don't know why, but I just have this feeling that if I were to go back to it, I would enjoy it more. And so I definitely want to do that at some point, because I really enjoyed Empire of the Vampire like a lot, and I'm kind of waiting for the sequel for that to come out, and then I want to jump back into Nevernight and try this series again, because I don't know, people who really like Jay Kristoff really like Nevernight, and I always thought that kind of everyone hated this series, but apparently it's got a ton of fans, so it must have a pretty good ending. The series is complete, so the people who are big fans of it have seen the ending, so I'm assuming that it's at least got something going in that department. And I think that at the time when I read this, I was pretty burnt out on the like magical school trope, or the like school for assassins trope, and I still am. I really dislike that trope. But at the same time, I remember this book not really leaning into that too hard, and the story itself and kind of the plot, what was going on, it was all keeping my attention a lot. I can't quite remember if I really liked the main character a whole lot, but definitely willing to go back and give this series another try. Then we have the Unwind Dystology, I think it's called, by Neal Shusterman. And I got to the second book in this series called Unholy, and I really liked it. I would say that this is the one that I'm most likely to return to the soonest. I really love this series so far, and this is one of the ones that I just got too busy to keep going with. But my co-host Gabe read it, and he was really into it and has been begging me to check it out again. So I think I'm going to have to do that pretty soon. One of the reasons why I love this book is that it horrified me in the best possible way. Just the whole idea of this series is so terrifying, and the first book literally kept me up at night. Not because the whole book wasn't like scary or anything, but there's this one scene at the end, and I don't want to give it away because everyone should have like a fresh experience with that scene. But there's a scene at the end of the first book that is just so beyond horrifying, that I was literally like thinking about it before I would go to bed. It would just pop into my head, and then I just wouldn't be able to sleep for hours because it's terrifying. But yeah, I love this, and I can't wait to see how it all wraps up. I should actually go read this right now. I'm actually really excited to pick this up again. Okay, so I know I said that these aren't in any particular order, and I still would say that they're not, but I did save this one for last for dramatic effect, and that is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and I stopped reading at The Shadow Rising, which is surprising. I left about halfway through The Shadow Rising. I didn't even finish it, and it's surprising because that's a lot of people's favorites. But I think the people that say it's their favorite are the people that have already read the series and in hindsight are looking back on The Shadow Rising, because it has apparently a lot of foreshadowing for future events. And that's not super fun for a first time reader. Like, I got to a point in the book, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I got to a point in the book where there was all this stuff happening that just made no sense. Like, as you're reading through it, like, it's all gobbledygook. Like, it does not make any sort of sense. And I asked my friends who are really big Wheel of Time fans. They're like, oh, you'll understand that later. When you do a reread, you'll get it. And I'm like, no, I want to understand it now. And so I feel like that's just a weird way to, like, I don't know, I guess kind of like isolate a lot of readers. It was just a really weird portion of the book, and it went on forever. And the whole fourth book was just slow. Like, it was just super, super slow. And, you know, the other books, they weren't super fast or anything. They weren't super, super fast paced. But this one was just a slog to get through. And so eventually I just had to sit it down. I was like, this is a 40 plus hour audiobook, which is just as daunting as how many books are in the series, I think. I don't know. I was just like, I cannot commit to another 20 hours of this. Like, this is just melting my brain. But I would like to go back to this series at some point because I really enjoyed the first three books. Like, I liked them a lot. And the other thing is, I had read the first three right before the show aired, and I honestly think that the show soured me a little bit to the books. And people say, like, you know, people who kind of argue about the show, they're like, oh, well, you know, the books are still there and the books will never be taken away from you. And I don't know if I completely agree with that, because in my experience watching the show and watching just the absolute travesty that it was, I was just like, man, this is just kind of souring me on the books. Like, every time I pick up one of the books to read them, I just think about the show, and I don't want that association between the two. And so I think that I had to give myself a little bit of time in between seeing the show and getting back into the books. But I definitely want to get back eventually, because I was really enjoying the series up to this point. But yeah, I really have no idea when I'll get back to this series. I would think that maybe sometime in the next year I'll try to pick up The Shadow Rising again and start from the beginning, because it's such a long book, and now I can't remember everything that happened in The Shadow Rising. I remember the first three pretty well. I remember pretty much all of the main events of the first three books. But The Shadow Rising, like I said, it was at the same time both complicated and incredibly boring, like almost nothing happening, from what I remember, which is weird. I don't think I've ever said that about a book. So yeah, I'd have to go back and reread it and check that out again. But don't give up on me. I do want to get back to this series for sure. I need a good chunk of time where we're not reading anything for the podcast. Like, sometimes we have like 2 weeks period of time where we just don't need to read anything for the podcast because we're doing like topical episodes or whatever. So one of those times I will hop back into the Shadow Rising and try to stick it out. And those are the series that I will finish eventually, I promise. Unfortunately, things get so busy with the podcast. We have a lot of required reading, like I said, and most of the extracurricular books that I do get to read on the side end up being like short thriller novels like Dean Koontz or Stephen King or something like that, or other pretty quick and short standalone books. I'll try to fit some of these in the future if I don't get distracted by a new shiny book. But tell me in the comments, what are your series that you keep meaning to go back to and finish out? Are you upset that I haven't finished all of The Wheel of Time? Let me know down below, or you can reach out to us on Twitter or Discord, which are linked in the description. Also in the description, you'll find a link to our Patreon, and we'd love your support either there, or you can help out the channel just by liking the video or subscribing to get notified of our future content. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. And a big shout out to our first Night Angel tier patron, Shad Zaman. Thank you so much, man.